Let's take a look at one example where curving a layer like this might be really useful. So I'm going to open up another project file that you will have access to, and it's in the 2 for 5 folder. This is a really quick ad for a burger chain, and I'll just show you the final render really quickly, just so you can get an at-a-glance view of what this After Effects project created. So it's a very quick animation moving through a couple of different environments. And it's fairly simple. There's not a lot to it. Very solid, single-colored extrusions on these text with a little bit of a bevel just to give a sense of depth, and some nice even lighting that are providing soft shadows. But there's a sense of an environment, even though we have these solid colors in the backgrounds. And that's because of this right here, this seamless transition from the floor to the wall that's using that curved layer ability that we have in After Effects. So now that you've seen this final render, let's take a look at how I built it. And like I said, this is a project file you can download and poke around in yourself. In my render comp, I have 3 different pre-comps for each one of the different scenes. So let's go into the first one and see how I made it. So we have a bunch of lights, a camera, the text layer, just the number 2, and then 3 layers for the environment. We have a wall, a curve, and a floor, and I'll show you how these are made. So to make this render faster, I'm going to disable the lights and the number, and then switch to my custom view 1 so we can see this at an angle. Honestly, this scene is not that render intensive, so I could even turn those back on, and it still is very responsive. I do have fast draft enabled though. If I turn this off to final quality, it's going to take longer to render. But still, nothing compared to the other scene because there are no reflections. There's no environment layer, and that really does take a long time to render. But what I've done here is made a floor layer, which is just a rectangle solid, and the same for the back wall layer. It's just rotated 90 degrees. And then in between them, I have a rectangle with a curve. And I went into the geometry options, set the curvature and the segments to fit this angle so that it looked like a nice quarter circle. And that provided a very seamless transition from the floor to the wall. This is a very common studio setup, something that you would have in a real physical studio called a cyclorama wall. And it just gives that nice seamless background transitioning from the floor to the wall. If we didn't have that curve, and I moved that wall layer down, then that transition is going to be extremely sharp. We're going to see that. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I just think that it looks a little bit nicer having that curved transition. And let me show you how I got this to line up perfectly. If I turn all of my lights and my text off, and I kind of just move these layers out of the way, the first thing I did was rotate this floor layer 90 degrees so that it was parallel to the floor, so that it actually created a floor, and I moved it down a little bit. I'm going to switch back to my custom view 1 so we can see this a little easier and navigate around here. But if I zoom in, what I did from here was create this curved layer and rotated it back 45 degrees, because if I take off the orientation transformations I made, this is actually what the solid looked like. It was very tall and skinny, and I can't control the direction of the curve, so I was stuck with it curving it that direction. So I had to rotate it like this, and then if I change my camera angle, you can see that that is not lining up with the floor or the wall. It's kind of just on its side. So I needed to also rotate this back 45 degrees by holding shift and clicking and dragging with the rotation tool on that y-axis. So now that's lined up nicely with how it's going to connect to the floor and the wall. But how did I get it perfectly lined up to the floor? Well, that was with snapping. Even in 3D space, snapping in After Effects still works. So I just moved my mouse close to the bottom center of this layer without grabbing that transform handle. I didn't want to scale the layer out or move it around like this. But I just grabbed right about here and then held down Command, which temporarily enables snapping. And you can see that I was close enough to the center edge of this floor layer that it just automatically said, oh, you want to snap to that edge. There we go. Now that's actually not the edge I wanted it to snap to, so I need to reposition this, get in a little bit tighter, and I could even do it from the corner here. So I want to grab it right here, hold Command, and there we go. It snaps right there, this corner to this corner of this layer, and those are perfectly lined up now. And then I did the same thing for the wall. I grab any one of these points, it could be the middle, hold down Command, and then just make sure that's snapping to the right point, and I've created a seamless wall. If I go back to my active camera and turn on all of my other 3D layers, then we get that nice seamless transition wall. I repeated that for the other two scenes. In this one, it was kind of a white color instead of yellow, but the same idea, floor, curve, wall. And then I just animated the cameras between them. I got the camera moves to look the way that I wanted them to, so I could just push straight into that white color, which is the same color as the environment of this next shot, and that's how I created those transitions. So it went from yellow to white, white into the yellow, and the final end scene is also on that yellow background. And there you can see my final composition. Again, feel free to download this project to actually see how I laid everything out and handled the lighting and the shadows. But the way that I got through the transitions is by putting all three of those comps in their own comp. This one does not have any 3D to it, so there is no 3D render engine to choose. But because there's no 3D, I'm not limited by any of those limitations of the Cinema 4D renderer. I did make that motion blur adjustment layer with the pixel motion blur to give me a better sense of speed as I'm pushing through those layers though. There you can see it better. I'm going to disable that just so this renders faster. And the way that I got from one scene to the next, you can see that the next scene is showing through here. If I bring up my keyframes by pressing U, this is the first frame that this second composition is visible, and I just have a feathered circular mask animated using the expansion for 3 frames. It's such a fast camera movement that I really just hand animated those 3 frames. There's nothing, then it appears, the expansion gets a little bigger, and then it completely reveals the entire composition. That's all there is to it. The camera from within that composition is kind of mimicking the same camera move from this one, so that matches up really nicely in terms of speed. And then it moves through to the next number 5, and then the same thing for this composition. This is the first frame you see it. It's not there on the previous frame, and then it appears. This one I did scale up a little bit as it animates on, but I use that same mask feather and expansion to reveal the rest of that composition, and that's how I transition from one comp into the next. It's pretty simple, but when you combine it with the 3D environment and all of those fast camera movements, it makes for a really nice looking final product.